Okay. Let's see. Okay, it is 9 o'clock. Looks like we have quite a few people here. I want to make sure that. All right. Welcome, everybody. Um, as you all know, the Prepaid and Collections Committee was brought a proposal on the way prepaid wireless surcharge distribution is distributed out to the authority boards. And there are some merits to this, that it doesn't fluctuate and there's steady numbers. And you wouldn't have to worry about, wireless call volume fluctuating, because currently it's done by wireless call volume, which we all know that if there's a major incident in one area in 1 month, and that will affect the percentages for the total for the year, of what then is calculated out to the authority boards. So I am going to kind of turn this over to Kimberly, if that's okay with you, Kimberly, because I want you to be able to really talk about about the pros and the thought process behind this.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So I can talk about the pros and the thought process, but I want to also say that this was just an idea. And of course, when you pull up numbers and impacts, that cannot be minimized, and nor should it be ignored. So the pros to it was exactly what Jackie has already presented, which is the big picture of our stats. Wireless call volume stats have been suspect, I would say, for a time. And even with the ECATS deployment, we're not fully deployed with that statewide. So to even get a good look at the wireless numbers would be difficult. So just trying to think about why was this set up to begin with? And when this legislation was passed, we didn't have any other state averaging of anything. So it was a way to do this at the point of sale. Money goes to the Department of Revenue, and then how can we distribute it back out? So I can't say that the method of doing it on wireless call volume was right or wrong. It's just what we did at the time. It was an idea that we came up with and applied it, and that's just been in legislation since day one. So again, because the numbers 1 + 1 isn't always equaling 2, and when we even run our numbers, we come up with different numbers than Lumen is providing over to PUC staff. So trying to think of a way to make sure that the numbers are static and they're true and can be validated. So that was the idea of, hey, what would it look like if we just did the distribution method based on SIP session instead of wireless call volume, which again is based on stats that are provided over. So that was the why. It was, what are we doing? We can't truly validate these numbers. And when we've challenged the numbers and shown them to be different, it could be different across the entire state, and everyone's reporting metrics and methodology are just different. So that's what we came to this committee to say, hey, should we explore this? And then I took a look at the numbers provided by the state regarding to distribution, and then did a spreadsheet on pros and cons. And the pros and cons would be gains and losses, right? Who would be impacted across the state by changing the model? And we have about 8 911 authorities with significant losses. So then the thought was, okay, if this is still a good idea, and we all agree that it's a good idea, how can we remedy those losses so authorities do not have that kind of fiscal impact? And that's really where I left it. And Jackie wanted to take the lead and reach out to the agencies and have the conversation, since she chairs this committee and also the Legislative Task Force Committee. So that was an idea of what I brought of, hey, should we look at it? and that's where we are.
Thanks, Kimberly. And yes, I was able to reach out to everyone except for Pueblo Police, who I do not see on the call. Just want to say that. And in those conversations, I also asked people to come with ideas if they had any of other scenarios or what might make this a better system. Jennifer, go ahead.
Thanks, Jackie. And I just wanted to clarify that the wireless calls that are pulled for the purposes of determining this distribution are pulled directly from Entrato's portal into our spreadsheets. So I don't disagree that the reporting from Entrato might not necessarily be perfect, but it's not a case of each individual agency submitting their wireless call numbers from various call metrics or call tracking systems at the PSAPs. It comes directly from Entrato.
Andrew's hand was up, but Kimberly, did you want to talk to that first?
Well, I was just going to clarify as it pertains to when we look at our numbers, we're pulling them, right? So then when I come back and look at our wireless call volume, it's different, even though those numbers are pulled from that old reporting tool provided by Entrato. And then prior to that, it was also numbers that were provided by CenturyLink, and there was some deductions that were happening for people that maybe would call back in a short period of time. And so it's just has evolved over the years. So I wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, and it's not a perfect reporting system. I agree.
Andrew, go ahead.
So my first question, Kimberly, when you're seeing those differences, what kind of percentage difference are you seeing?
Andrew, I haven't ran them for this year using ECATS. Previously, it was close to like 1.2% over the big picture, which makes a financial difference. Not huge, but of course, if it's throughout, it's throughout. And then I think the reply back from PUC staff on the last time I submitted it was, if it's off for you, it's probably off from everyone. So it's kind of like a average or cost of being off. So.
So what I'm hearing is that there's two challenges that we're trying to solve, and I want to make sure I'm hearing this correctly. One is the fluctuation and the fact that we can't necessarily rely on a static dollar amount month over month. And the second is the accuracy of the numbers that are coming through Entrato. Am I missing anything substantial there?
No, I think that's what started the question, Andrew, of just saying, hey, and also again, just that, how are we managing and distributing state funds today? And we have two different methods, and it can be very complicated as well to explain that to people. So trying to look at some sort of common element, but again, the impacts are significant, and that should not be minimized or overlooked.
Sure. So what would be, so in my mind, it seems that accuracy of data, regardless of the financial impact that it has on all the authorities, having accurate data coming from Entrato it ought to be a priority. So I think that's, I know that's going to be a continuing conversation. As to the fluctuation piece, so I think my take looking at this, and obviously, you know, Denver stands to lose a lot of money, but the SIP session doesn't feel like it correlates with workload and demand. And ideally, the funding should, you know, correlate with what is being asked of the PSAP. With that said, would it, as an alternative, would it be reasonable, and maybe Jennifer, you could answer this, that instead of doing it month over month, we take a look at the previous years. So for all of 2024, we look at a 12-month average from 2023. And if Denver, for example, took 25% of wireless call volume, then we just get 25% of the distribution month over month. And we don't worry about, major incidents screwing that up. And we standardize the percentage on a kind of a 1-year lag. Is that a reasonable way to try to approach this?
This is Jackie. Andrew, I probably misspoke when I was talking about the 1 month, because they do average the year.
Oh, okay.
But if you had a really busy 1 month, it
It
does
can skew it.
It can skew the year.
I gotcha.
Yeah, and so I apologize if I misrepresented it, but yes, they take the wireless call volume for the entire year and give a percentage, and it goes for the following year. And those percentages do change from year to year. Joe, you had your hand up, then Daryl, then Kimberly.
One, I was wondering, I was out of the country, and so I don't know if it's already distributed, but can I get a copy of the spreadsheet, look, as to who's affected how and the assumptions that were made in doing that analysis? And then the other question I have is, my understanding was one of the motivating factors for ECATS was to get a more reliable and accurate data source for the prepaid distribution. I heard Kimberly say that the ECATS deployment isn't completed yet, but would it make sense, since we kind of invested in that partly to address this, wait until it's deployed and see how that impacts the distribution and the volatility in the distribution amounts?
Yes and yes. And Kimberly, if somebody wants to answer that, but Daryl's has his hand raised, so I'm gonna let Daryl go and then Kimberly.
Thank you. I was going to make the same point as Joe, is that the plan has been that when ECATS is fully deployed across the state, that we would switch to that instead of the Intrado user portal, which we're using now, with the assumption that ECATS will probably provide more accurate data, although I don't know that we have anything to prove that would be more accurate, other than the fact that it's a more premier product that people actually pay to use in their PSAPs. The other point I wanted to make is regarding Andrew's suggestion. What the statute says is that the commission shall establish a formula for distribution of revenues, this is of the prepaid 911 charge, to governing bodies from the prepaid wireless 911 charge based on the governing authority's portion of the total 911 wireless call volume. But it does not say over what period. So if we wanted to change, if this committee wanted to recommend, the task force agreed to change the period over which we are taking an average, maybe make it like the last 3 years or something like that, so it doesn't change as frequently or isn't as subject to outliers. I don't think we would need a statutory change to do that. So just throwing that out there as one possibility to think about.
Thanks, Daryl. Kimberly, and then Joel.
So timing really could be everything. And I don't know if we have a timing from CenturyLink when all the ECATs in the state will be done. So I'm very curious to see what all those numbers look like when we're able to pull them through ECAT. And as it pertains to Andrew's comment just about wireless call volume, and I was thinking about that as well, Andrew, and part of it was that the agencies that need to have to be able to handle more calls typically have more concurrent SIP sessions. So not always true, but Denver with 100 SIP sessions, higher call volume has a greater need to be able to answer those calls. So you have more SIP sessions.
And Joel, go ahead.
Sure. So first, in response to Kimberly's last comment, that's not always the case. We don't have a tremendous number of SIP sessions, and yet we thought about that when we were going through the process of cutting over, and wanted to try to remain as efficient as possible. So, we have, fewer than others that have call volumes that are quite a bit less than us. So that doesn't always work out, and we're taking a pretty big hit on this proposal. But my other question is, Jackie, we had that meeting, and you said if people had ideas of how to, kind of adjust for the losses that some agencies are taking, that you'd like to hear about them. Now, we really couldn't come up with anything other than something similar to what Andrew proposed, but did you hear anything else?
I did not hear any other suggestions, Joel. But yeah, other than what Andrew just said. So
Okay. It just seems like the way this is set up right now that there may not be a lot of rhyme or reason to where increases and decreases in revenue are going when it's based on SIP sessions, and SIP sessions. Some places have very high number of SIP sessions, even though their call volumes are not substantial. Others have, like us, we're fairly low. Now we're just built out our new building, and we're going to be adding capacity to our operations center. We intend to add some more SIP sessions when we get that work completed, but we're not there yet. And I don't know if SIP sessions is really a good proxy for workload, like Andrew was referring to, because it seems like call volume is probably a better proxy for workload than SIP sessions, when you see some fairly small centers. And I know one, for example, Federal Heights is fairly small center, incredibly small center, and they have 3 SIP sessions, and we have 9 and another 8 in our backup. But we do more than 10 times the call load that they do, and even though our SIP sessions are only 3 times higher. And so that's just one example that I can give you, but it seems like SIP sessions may not be the best proxy for workload or where the money should go.
thank you, Joel. Joe, your hand's up.
Yeah, so I understand that after a recent legislative change, there's been a big increase in the amounts that we're having remitted. Are the amounts and the changes in distribution sufficient that distributing on the basis of SIP session would create a perverse incentive for people to increase their number of SIP sessions, because they would wind up getting more amounts of the surcharge distributed than it would cost for the SIP sessions?
Daryl, I'm going to let you tackle that, and then Andrew's next.
Yeah, Joe, that was actually anticipated when we went to SIP sessions for the distribution of the state 911 surcharge, which is why the statute actually directs the commission. I don't remember the exact language right now, but I can pull it up, to regulate that. And we actually have an application process. So if a governing body wants to increase their number of SIP sessions and be reimbursed for it through the state 911 surcharge, they have to have an application approved by the commission to increase their number of SIP sessions. If we went to SIP sessions for the prepaid wireless, I think that would just increase the need for that, because otherwise you could just say, I need 100 SIP sessions, and buy 100 SIP sessions, and you'll get all of the money from the prepaid that would go along with that.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, Daryl. Conversely, however, like Denver, we have 100, and I know we've had conversations in various meetings that I don't think we actually need 100, and I've been struggling to get accurate data from Lumen to help me make an informed decision. But we were planning on cutting those back, and in doing so, increasing the amount of the reimbursement, the percentage of the reimbursement that would be available to the other authorities around the state. If we were to go to prepaid based on SIP session, I would be significantly disincentivized to reduce our number of concurrent sessions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And Tina, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess that's my question is, I wasn't in this position when the EZNet was started. But is there a formula that determines where people started with their SIP sessions or how many they started? Was there a formula for calculating that, or did everybody just kind of guess?
I'll let Kimberly answer.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And what we did, I think it goes back to when agencies deployed their camera trunks when they first went live with 911. And so when we move forward with the EZNet, the conversations were, do you have the right number? And so Andrew brings up a great point. The only way to really determine the right number is through a traffic study. And so we did ask CenturyLink to do a traffic study. And what a traffic study looks at is, again, how many 911 calls are concurrent happening at the exact same time throughout a period of time. So you know what your capacity really needs to be. And we've never been able to get a traffic study completed by CenturyLink. So people truly looked at what they had in their legacy environment with the Camatrons and then made a determination.
Tina, go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Kimberly. I appreciate that. I think, I'm not sure how the rest of the group feels, but I think, like Andrew said, we have maybe some possibility with some better data once ECATS is fully deployed, but also maybe pushing for that traffic study. Kimberly, I would love to have that done at Weld, and I'm not sure where we start with that or why you were denied that, but I would love to have further conversation about that.
And this is Jackie. I did get a traffic study for Douglas, but it was really hard to read. So I'm not sure, Kimberly, what your roadblocks were either, but the traffic study was really difficult to read. Deanie can help me attest to that.
Yeah, and so what we were asking for was through those EZNet conversations for deployments when everybody in the state was really struggling with that exact question that Tina brought forward is, what's the right number? And so the roadblocks were from CenturyLink, and maybe Andrew can speak more to the roadblocks he's getting, because I know he's been working on that for a couple of years, trying to get what's the right size for Denver? How many SIP sessions do they need? So the answers vary from CenturyLink, but it could be something that the EZNet users group comes back with a formal ask in writing to see if they can compel CenturyLink to do that.
Yeah,
Kathy, are you here? Will you put a note? Go ahead, Joe.
So are we expecting that ECATS will give us the equivalent of a traffic study?
No, ECATS will not. ECATS can run reports, but it's different. It's not the same.
So in a traffic study, we're looking at the maximum number of concurrent calls, or I'm trying to understand what information we need. And I mean, I understand that there have been points in time when breadths of PSAPs have received more than 100 calls on one highway, major highway accident. And so, how you interpret that is also, I think, going to be, people have to concur in how we interpret that data. And so I'm not sure. I guess the question is, what data are we looking to get? And then how are we going to use it? And is ECATS a source of that data? Or, is a traffic study going to give us what we're actually expecting it will?
Kimberly, you want to take that?
Kind of. I guess I'll kind of take it. I think we have two different conversations going on here. I think from a prepaid distribution perspective, an idea, can't say it was a great idea. It was an idea to explore, and we have numbers, and I think timing is everything. So that's why we have conversations, which I think are fantastic. So again, we're not married to this idea. That's why we just wanted to bring it to the committee. And I think once you start looking at the numbers, and I told Jackie this in an email, I could not get behind and support anything that would have this kind of budget impact to any of our governing partners. So once you start really laying out the numbers and you think, well, there's no clear way to mitigate the impact, an idea becomes a bad idea. So I think timing is everything as it pertains to reports and what ECATS can hopefully do across Colorado. So the two pieces I see that we have here is, when is ECATS going to be fully implemented so we can really start crunching numbers and taking a look? And then the question you have, Joe, regarding traffic study, I think Andrew can dive into specifically what he's been asking CenturyLink for. But again, it's talking about capacity, because you can run time of day, day of week, high call volume, but really looking at how many calls are hitting and utilizing what percentage of your SIP sessions at the same time. So it's, what's that traffic look like in coming into your environment? So it dives a little bit deeper. Or maybe Jackie, you can talk about what you did get from CenturyLink, since we never received one.
I got pages and pages worth of data that they tried to explain to Deanie and I, and neither one of us could make heads or tails. And then when we went back to look at it, we were having difficulty understanding what they told us. And it was just, I could probably share it out with you if that's okay with Deanie. But yeah, it was not helpful. Daryl, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it also, how you interpret a study like that depends on some factors within your own center. So what is your tolerance for calls rolling over to your rollover backup? If you want it to never roll over to your rollover backup, then you have to look at your most high peak ever and count the number, that's the number of lines that you need. But then there's also the factor of how many seats do you have? How many people do you have to take calls? Denver has 100 concurrent sessions, but Andrew, my understanding is typically you only have about 16 to 20 call takers on at a time, but you also have a call queue. So there's multiple factors there to involve, and a lot of it comes down to what your tolerance is for people to sit in queue or for people to get rolled over to your backup.
Thanks for that, Daryl. And yeah, in the traffic study, I mean, it was clearly, you could see peak times where it did roll over, but it didn't really help make the decision on concurrent sessions for us. And that being that, again, what Daryl kind of said, how many people do you have answering calls? You can only answer so many, and impact your rollover center so much. So when I looked at Douglas's, we did make the decision that we weren't going over far enough to need to increase SIP sessions. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to make clear that, I don't have any objection to looking at ideas and ways that may improve things. My concern is when we're looking at this whole area, when you're asking, for example, a traffic study may not give us what we're expecting. And it may be better ask CenturyLink or ask if there's a way through ECATS for specific data that we would need to evaluate to make the determination. And rather than asking for some study to define, this is the data set we're looking for, can you provide this? And then the other thing is, how do we make sure that we're looking at it in the same way for all of the different authorities, PSAPs, and for the discussion I just heard, you may look at it differently for different reasons, such as tolerance to have them roll over.
Thank you, Joe. Michael?
Good morning. Regarding the prepaid collection and distribution, I can absolutely see the benefit, from the computational workload side of going to SIP sessions, the benefit of a more uniform, everything else we do is SIP session based. Not knowing more of the background, the history, I guess my big question is the state surcharge, the purpose was for EZNet reimbursements, and so that is absolutely SIP based. I guess my question is for the prepaid and collections, is the purpose or was the purpose when it was introduced to reimburse based on, specifically on wireless call volumes? And therefore, maybe we can find a better way to compute it, but it should still be based on those wireless call volumes as opposed to SIP sessions.
Thanks, Michael. Yes, the original idea was to do wireless call volumes because we really had no other alternative, no other thought process at that time. It was prepaid, and so we based it off wireless call volumes. Andrew?
Just in response to Joe, what you were saying earlier, I didn't ask for a traffic study. Matter of fact, until Kimberly said those words on this call, I wasn't aware that that's what I needed to ask for. I actually went to Lumen and said, hey, I'd like to get an idea of whether or not I actually need 100 SIP sessions. Can you help me make that determination? And in retrospect, I think that was my mistake, because my belief is that Lumen knows I don't need 100, and they are not incentivized to help me come to that conclusion. And so they have basically just been unhelpful. I have asked for it. I get no response. I ask again. They say, oh yeah, we have to get you set up and we'll send you an RSA token so you can log in and do the various things. And then nothing happens. I get my IT manager engaged where we're pestering, Winkleman and Kunkelman and everybody over there. And it's just radio silence. So it feels like I'm being intentionally ghosted so that they don't have to give me the data I'm looking for. So I think short of the PUC compelling Lumen to do a comprehensive traffic study for all authorities and providing actionable data, not the gobbledygook that Douglas got, I don't have any faith in them as a partner to give me the information I'm looking for.
Joe, go ahead.
My understanding, which may need some correction, is that before the ESINet, Lumen recommended a number of trunk lines to PSAPs based upon traffic volumes or some, data that it was using. And generally, I thought when we went to concurrent sessions, it was based upon trunk assignments to PSAPs. On a separate issue, when wireless came along, wireless carriers were initially paying on prepaid. They were paying the surcharges, remitting them to the 911 authorities. And then at some point, they decided that for the prepaid wireless, that they weren't build service or something, the statute that talked about, build customers or something like that. And they said, we don't build these customers, so we don't have to pay for the prepaid service. And that's why we had to go through the legislative effort to put in place the prepaid surcharge. And that the intent was just to get surcharges paid by all customers who are able to take advantage of 911 service, emergency telephone service. And that was kind of how we got here. And the original numbers for trunk lines was determined or recommended by CenturyLink or US West at some point. Maybe it was Mountain Bell. But I have no knowledge. I was around when the initial or any updates that were made. I wasn't aware of what data they were using for that purpose. But I think we should be able, the 911 community and the people who run PSAPs should be able to determine, is it concurrent calls, or, since there can be big spikes in concurrent calls, what is the data that the PSAPs, should be used to determine the number of concurrent sessions a PSAP is subscribed to?
Thanks, Joe. Kimberly, you have your hand up.
I just wanted to give my support to what Andrew said about getting CenturyLink to provide a report across the entire state that can be meaningful to the authority boards to be able to look at our SIP session needs and requirements. And Daryl brought up tolerance and making those decisions around tolerance, but without the data, we can't even make those decisions. So I just think that could be a good path and a good next step. One, getting the data of when everyone's going to be ECATs in that timeline to close that out. And then two, having the request come from some entity, even if it's the EZNet user group, or some sort of required request for them to deliver that report to us would be great.
Thank you. Daryl, go ahead.
Yeah, since there's been a couple of comments about the PUC compelling CenturyLink to provide a traffic study, there's nothing in our rules currently that would require that, and we're just finishing up a rulemaking now, so it would be bad timing for another rulemaking. But I know that CenturyLink has been talking about filing another tariff amendment to include new services like text to 911. I don't know how close they are to that, but when they do that, that might be a good opportunity for parties to negotiate with them on including a traffic study, maybe once a year or something like that, once every 2 years, as part of that tariff. Alternatively, maybe something from the task force or as a petition to the commission could direct the commission to, or ask the commission to compel a traffic study, but that would be a lot messier of a process. So if you can do it through the tariff, I think that would be the cleanest.
I like that idea.
That's a good suggestion. I like that. Deanie, I briefly saw your hand. I just want to make sure that you had a hand and you needed to say something. And then Joe.
Sorry, I was having some difficulty with the audio. Yeah, I just also wanted to support what Andrew was saying. I get really irritated. That's the nicest way I could say it about CenturyLink and how they don't respond to us and gaslight us. I think they're gaslighting you, Andrew, and they gaslight us on many occasions when we ask for things, and then we move on to other subjects. So I'm totally behind you. I think if we could all jump on the bandwagon there and apply some pressure, however we do it, that would be excellent. I just feel really passionate about that. We should be getting a lot more information from them, and we need to apply pressure.
Absolutely. Thank you, Deanie. Joe?
I'm probably being a broken record. I'm sorry. My concern is that the term traffic study can mean different things to different people, or have different expectations about what that is. And what I've heard from you, Jackie, is that the data, the raw traffic study, really wasn't very useful. And so perhaps a better way to make the request would be to say, we would like to get this specific, type of data. How can you provide this? And ask the specific data we want, rather than ask for a traffic study, which it sounds like isn't going to give us usable information.
Good point. Jeff?
So my understanding as it pertains to traffic study is, back when we were contemplating JeffCom and the merger of all the various PSAPs that came to comprise JeffCom, we were looking at how many camera trunks we had in each of these PSAPs, and did we need to bring that many camera trunks into JeffCom when they combined. And so the traffic study purpose was to determine, how many camera trunks at that time we would need in order to handle the potential traffic coming into JeffCom. Now, we lit on 40 concurrent sessions for JeffCom after discussions with Lumen and, you know, trying to anticipate what the load might be. And then we have some other concurrent sessions down in our backup center. But, you know, that model has changed now with the advent of the agreement that JeffCom has with Denver for backup and et cetera, et cetera. It actually is probably time to relook at that. Do we really need that many? You know, where are we now? And now we have Clear Creek coming into the picture also. I really am having trouble with seeing any correlation between prepaid and concurrent sessions. I really wish that we could just stipulate that that's not a methodology that we're going to move forward with, at least now. And it seems to me that a lot of this are operational decisions by the individual PSAPs or ECCs as to what they anticipate their needs going to be. And I know, you know, both Kimberly and Mike have gone through a literal baptism of fire here the last few weeks. And, you know, in a peak critical incident like that, I think is when one should be looking internally and seeing, you know, how many concurrent sessions do we need in a situation like that? And do we need some buffer above that for, you know, something that is even worse than those events? So my 2 cents.
Thanks, Jeff. Anybody else? I think we've had some really good discussion, and as Kimberly mentioned, this was simply an idea. We've heard a couple more ideals since then. One was to wait and look at ECATs and see if it's a little more accurate with wireless call volume. And Jeff, did you raise your hand again?
Yeah, one time I forgot, and this is for Daryl. Daryl, can you refresh our memories as to the money from prepaid flows into DOR from point of sale and other sources? Can you kind of briefly summarize where that money comes from?
Sure. So it is collected at point of sale for the retailers. That's both online and in-person retailers. And it's collected at the same time as sales tax. So the PUC never sees it, never sees the figures, and it goes straight to DOR. That's always been a problem. It's kind of separate from the issues we're talking about today, but in that we have no assurance because DOR won't share taxpayer data as to what the compliance rate is on retailers paying that. Additionally, Lifeline providers are able to negotiate a percentage in their in their eligible telecommunications carrier applications to the PUC. So they're not paying the full amount of the prepaid surcharge, but they are paying a percentage. And I think right now it's been level set at 0.6%. So it's significantly lower than what the other prepaid providers are paying, but that also goes to DOR. And then it's distributed based on a list of percentages that the commission provides to DOR on an annual basis, which is based off of the last year's wireless call volume. And one thing that has been brought up to me recently, they say, well, why don't you give them the percentage of prepaid wireless call volume instead of total wireless call volume? And that's simply because the IUP does not, the Intrado user portal does not distinguish between regular wireless and prepaid wireless. And in fact, I don't think I don't think Intrado has that data to provide. So there's no way for us to separate those out. So it's just total wireless call volume.
Jeff, go ahead.
And so given that, Daryl, would a allocation based on population make more sense than what we're doing now? I don't know.
You say population, Jeff?
Yes.
I think potentially, but the problem with that is that we have a lot of areas of the state where the population varies wildly and widely based on what time of year it is. So if you want to include tourist populations, which makes a huge impact in some communities, there's not a super easy way to calculate that. And I remember in the past, we have talked to or tried to collect data on tourism numbers for some of the resort communities, and it's just not an easy number to come by.
And at one time we contemplated trying to see if we could get cell tower affiliation data and base it on that. I don't know. I mean,
Michael and then Joe.
Daryl hit on it. I was just going to bring up that a huge amount of our wireless 911s are from tourists, especially in the winter hitting the slopes.
I figured that's why your hand went up. Joe, go ahead.
You're on mute if you're talking, Joe.
Well, did we lose Joe? We'll come back to you in a minute, Joe. So I just kind of want to.
I'm here.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. That's okay. Go ahead.
I was pointing out that we have major northwest, east, south, highways that carry a lot of traffic and pass through counties that have, in some cases, fewer people than pass through the highway, who were resident than the number of people who pass through on the highway every day, and are a significant source of 911 calls for highway incidents. That's my understanding.
That is correct. Thank you, Joe. Okay. Again, I think this has been a really good conversation. I really appreciate the proposal because I think it's important to look at things and how we're doing them, and come up with ways that maybe work better for all of us. So with that, I think that, again, what I heard from this committee, that perhaps we should wait to see if ECAT's wireless numbers are any significantly, I guess, or any different than the Entrado user portal numbers. We also talked about the possibility of maybe changing the averaging over a year or 2 years, that kind of thing. And we talked about big time about getting data from CenturyLink so we can accurately determine exactly how many concurrent sessions, SIP sessions that a PSAP might need. Did I miss anything? Okay, so I think what we need to do with this committee is see what we want to do with this proposal. If we want to table it for now and wait for ECATs, if we want to continue to look at other methods, because as Kimberly said, and as I think everyone feels, we don't want to harm any one of us in a significant manner financially. So I think that maybe this is, like I said, it's a good stab at a proposal. And I think that this committee just needs to decide if we want to move forward with this or other proposals, or simply wait for ECATs. Kimberly, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't see a path forward right now. I think that we have to table this. It was a good discussion item. And again, that's where all things start, right? Is looking at data, and we did. And so I believe we need to just sit tight and again, get dates of when ECATS is going to be ready so we can start looking at that data from that reporting tool.
Thank you, Kimberly. And Kathy, I think we had a couple of marching orders for you.
Yep, I'm updating the agenda for tomorrow, listening to everybody. So we're good.
Thank you, Kathy. Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, there was discussion of who would be best to request or obtain data from CenturyLink. I think one of the issues we had is we used to have Jim Carroll, who was from Colorado, who was the head of the public safety products group for US West and Quest. He was pretty responsive to us. And now I don't even know who that is. I mean, it's Tim Kunkelman, who's the government affairs director for a bunch of states, who it all falls on. I think, but I was going to suggest if data is requested again, rather than requesting some report, find out what specific or agree on what specific data we would want. And then for the ESINet users group to make that request. That was one of the reasons that we had the ESINet users group formed, was to make those kind of requests and obtain information where necessary from CenturyLink.
And do we want to take up the specifics of needs for this committee or for the ESINet committee?
Well, I would think that would turn on who's best to decide the needs. And that would seem to me to be the operational folks running the PSAPs.
Okay. Shall we put that as a item on the task force agenda to maybe stand up the committee that could look at that?
Or just on the next user group, the ESINet user group meeting, we can throw that in under new business.
All right, another chore for you, Kathy.
Sorry, I was typing. What needs to be added?
Instead of asking for a blanket traffic study,
Okay.
stand up a group that can come in and say, we specifically need these data points.
Okay. Sounds good.
So that we don't get the whole, what they call a traffic study, because it was really difficult. So,
And the purpose of those data points is to establish the number of concurrent sessions a PSAP may
that's
want.
correct. Yes, that's correct. So, I want to thank everyone. I especially want to thank Kimberly for all the hard work she did on this. I know this spreadsheet wasn't easy. And I want to definitely thank Kimberly for bringing this proposal. I think we also, it caused great discussion, and I think we've gotten a lot out of this and well worth our time and energy, and thank everyone for their participation. Is there any other comments, thoughts? Deanie, go ahead.
I want to thank you as well for your hard work.
Thank you, Deanie. Okay. Well, we will schedule another prepaid and collections committee as we need. So, thank you all for your participation and your help and looking at this proposal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody.
All right. Bye.